To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call That Changed Everything. Staff Sergeant Jack Knapp adjusted his tactical vest for the last time at Forward Operating Base Kandahar. After 18 months in Afghanistan, he was finally going home to his 10-year-old son, Ryan. The deployment had been brutal. Roadside bombs, firefights, and endless patrols through hostile territory, but nothing had prepared him for the phone call that would arrive in his final hour overseas. Jack had built a reputation among his unit as unbreakable. At 34, he stood 6'2", with weathered features that spoke of desert sand and mountain snow. His fellow soldiers called him Ghost for his ability to move silently through enemy territory and eliminate threats before they knew he was there. Born in rural Montana, Jack had learned to hunt before he could properly ride a bike, skills that served him well in special operations. His marriage to Celia Lawrence had ended 2 years ago, a casualty of his military commitments and her inability to handle the stress of his deployments. The divorce had been bitter, with Celia taking primary custody of Ryan while Jack was deployed. He'd accepted it then, believing it was best for his son to have stability. Now, he realized how wrong he'd been. The satellite phone rang at 0400 hours, just as Jack was finishing his final equipment check. Ryan's voice came through the static, barely a whisper. "Dad, they taped my hands. Mom's boyfriend says I'm going to call him Daddy or else." Jack's blood turned to ice. In the background, he could hear men laughing, boots scraping concrete, and the distinct beep of a camera recording. His son's voice continued, each word like a knife to his heart. "They made me kneel on the grass and made me lick their shoes," Ryan whispered, terror evident in every syllable. Jack's training kicked in immediately. His voice became deadly calm, the same tone he used before eliminating high-value targets. "Wait for me." The line went dead. Jack was already moving, his mind shifting into the cold, calculating mode that had kept him alive through countless missions. No one touched his son and lived to see another sunrise. Within hours, Jack was wheels up on a transport plane, pulling every favor he had to get emergency leave approved. As the plane lifted off, he began planning. He had learned Celia was living with Carlton Orozco, a man Jack had never met but was about to know intimately. During the flight, Jack used his military contacts to run a background check. Carlton Orozco, 38, had a history Jack found interesting. 3 arrests for assault, 2 domestic violence charges that were mysteriously dropped, and rumors of underground fighting circuits. The man was 6'4", 260 pounds of muscle, and surrounded himself with similarly violent friends. He thought his size and connections made him untouchable. He was about to learn otherwise. Chapter 2. Gathering Intelligence. Jack landed at Denver International Airport after 36 hours of travel. He'd used the flight time wisely, reaching out to old contacts and gathering intelligence. His first stop wasn't home. It was to see Dennis Doyle, a former Army Ranger who now worked private security. Dennis ran a legitimate security firm, but Jack knew he still had connections to less legitimate operations. They met at a diner on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. "You look like hell, Ghost," Dennis said, sliding into the booth across from Jack. "I need information on Carlton Orozco. Everything you can find." Dennis's expression darkened. "I know that name. He runs with a crew called the Iron Wolves. They think there's some kind of motorcycle club, but they're really just criminals with bikes. Protection rackets, underground fighting, drug distribution. The cops can't touch them because half the department's on their payroll." Jack absorbed this information, his mind already working through possibilities. "I need to know their routines, their weaknesses, their hangouts." "Jack, what's this about?" Jack's jaw tightened. "They hurt my son." Dennis didn't ask for details. In their world, that was enough. "Give me 24 hours. I'll get you everything you need." While Dennis worked his contacts, Jack drove to his ex-wife's neighborhood. The house was in a middle-class suburb. Nothing special, but Jack noticed the signs immediately. Security cameras, reinforced doors, and the kind of modification someone makes when they're expecting trouble. He parked 3 blocks away and used skills learned in urban warfare to get closer. Through his binoculars, he saw Carlton for the first time, a mountain of a man with arms covered in prison tattoos and the dead eyes of someone who enjoyed inflicting pain. But it was what Jack saw next that nearly broke his military discipline. Ryan, his son, flinched every time Carlton moved. The boy's shoulders were hunched, his movements careful and fearful. This wasn't just about the phone call. This had been going on for months. Jack's hands clenched around the binoculars. He'd killed enemy combatants for far less than what these men had done to his child. His phone buzzed with a text from Dennis. Got what you need. Meet at the warehouse at midnight. Chapter 3. The Network Revealed. The warehouse Dennis used for sensitive meetings was in an industrial district surrounded by empty lots and abandoned buildings. Jack arrived to find Dennis waiting with a folder thick with surveillance photos and documents. Your boy Carlton is worse than I thought, Dennis began, spreading photos across the metal table. The Iron Wolves aren't just local criminals. They're connected to a human trafficking network run by a man named Jeffrey Griffith. Orozco specializes in breaking people, making them compliant. Jack's vision went red for a moment. You're telling me they're traffickers? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And your son? Dennis paused, choosing his words carefully. They're grooming him. The videos, the humiliation, it's textbook conditioning. Jack forced himself to look at the surveillance photos. Carlton with known traffickers. Money changing hands. And in one photo that made Jack's stomach turn, children being loaded into vans. There's more, Dennis continued. Your ex-wife isn't just complicit, she's actively involved. Celia's been recruiting for them. Single mothers with young children. She gets them to trust her, introduces them to Carlton's crew. And then, how many? Jack's voice was barely human. At least a dozen families over the past year. Maybe more. Jack studied the organizational chart Dennis had created. Carlton was muscle, but Jeffrey Griffith was the brains. Beyond them were lawyers, cops, judges, a network that had operated with impunity for years. The FBI? Jack asked. 3 agents we could trust. But they need evidence, and these people are careful. They've been operating for years without leaving much of a trail. Jack's training told him to work with law enforcement to build a case properly. But his father's heart told him his son didn't have time for bureaucracy. I need weapons, Jack said. Dennis opened another case, revealing tactical equipment that would make a Navy SEAL jealous. I figured you might. But Jack, if you do this, there's no going back. You'll be outside the law. Jack picked up a combat knife, testing its weight. I've been outside the law before. The difference is now it's personal. What's the plan? Jack smiled, and Dennis was reminded why enemies had learned to fear the ghost. I'm going to dismantle their entire operation. But first, I'm going to get my son back. And Carlton Orozco is going to learn what happens when you hurt a soldier's family. As Jack loaded the weapons into his vehicle, Dennis grabbed his arm. You know they'll come after you with everything they have. Let them come, Jack replied. I've spent 18 months hunting people who shoot back. These criminals won't be a problem. But even as he said it, Jack knew this would be his most dangerous mission yet. He wasn't just fighting enemy combatants. He was taking on an entire criminal network with connections throughout law enforcement and government. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure meant not just his death, but his son's continued suffering. As he drove away from the warehouse, Jack began making his final preparations. Tomorrow, the war would begin. Chapter 4. First Strike. Jack spent the night in a hotel, planning his approach with military precision. He'd identified 3 key targets. Carlton's Lieutenant Steve Roberts, who handled the day-to-day trafficking operations, a corrupt Detective Sam Fields who provided police protection, and Carlton himself. His first target was Roberts, who ran a gym that served as a front for the trafficking operation. Jack had learned that Roberts would be alone Monday morning, handling a shipment that Dennis's contact had identified as another group of victims. At 0500 hours, Jack was in position. He'd studied the building's layout, identified entry and exit points, and neutralized the security cameras with equipment Dennis had provided. When Roberts arrived, Jack was waiting. Steve Roberts, Jack said, stepping out of the shadows as Roberts unlocked the gym's back door. Roberts spun around, his hand moving toward a concealed weapon. He never reached it. Jack's military training took over, a precise strike to the throat, followed by a chokehold that rendered Roberts unconscious in seconds. When Roberts woke up, he was zip-tied to a chair in the gym's basement. Jack sat across from him, calmly cleaning a combat knife. "You know who I am?" Jack asked. Roberts tried to bluster. "You're making a big mistake, soldier boy. You have no idea who you're messing with." Jack held up his phone, showing Roberts' surveillance photos Dennis had provided. Steve Roberts, 31 years old. 3 arrests for assault, suspected in the disappearance of at least 6 children. Currently holding 12 victims in a warehouse on 5th Street. Roberts' face went pale. "How did you? I know everything, Steve. Your entire operation, your buyers, your suppliers. The only question is whether you want to cooperate or whether I start removing fingers." The interrogation lasted 2 hours. By the end, Jack had locations, names, account numbers, and most importantly, confirmation that his son was being held at Carlton's compound along with other victims. Jack left Roberts tied up with a note for the FBI agents Dennis trusted. He'd live, but his information would bring down half the trafficking network. Target 2 was Detective Fields, who Jack found at his usual breakfast spot. This required a more subtle approach. Jack sat at the next table and waited. When Fields stepped outside to take a phone call, Jack followed. The conversation was illuminating. "Yeah, Carlton, I got your message. No, there's no heat from the Roberts situation. Look, if someone's sniffing around, we handle it like always." Jack stepped up behind Fields. "Detective Fields." Fields turned, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. "Who's asking?" "Staff Sergeant Jack Knapp. I believe you know my son, Ryan." Fields' expression changed from confusion to alarm. This was the father Carlton had mentioned, the soldier who was supposed to be overseas for another month. "I don't know what you're talking about." Jack moved faster than Fields could follow, disarming him and slamming him against the wall. "Wrong answer. You're going to make a phone call to Carlton. You're going to tell him there's been a development in the Roberts situation and he needs to move the package tonight." "I'm not telling him anything. You assault a police officer you're looking at." Jack pressed the barrel of Fields' own gun against his kneecap. "Detective, I've spent the last 18 months killing people who are better armed and better trained than you. I'm trying to give you a chance to do the right thing." Fields looked into Jack's eyes and saw something that made him reconsider his loyalties. He made the call. "Carlton, it's Fields. We got a problem with Roberts. Someone grabbed him, and I think they're working up the chain. You need to move the package tonight." "Yeah, all of them. Use the mountain location." Jack smiled. Carlton was about to make the biggest mistake of his life by consolidating all the victims in one location. It would make Jack's job much easier. After securing Fields with evidence of his corruption for the FBI, Jack made his way to the final preparation phase. Tonight, he would end this. Chapter 5: The Mountain Compound. Carlton's mountain compound was 20 miles outside the city, a former hunting lodge surrounded by dense forest. Jack arrived at sunset, using the gathering darkness to his advantage. Through his scope, he counted 8 guards, multiple vehicles, and what appeared to be a main building where the victims were likely being held. Jack had faced worse odds in Afghanistan, but never with such personal stakes. He spent 2 hours observing patterns, identifying weak points, and confirming his son's location. We finally saw Ryan through a window, alive but clearly traumatized. Jack felt his resolve solidify into something unbreakable. The attack began at 0200 hours. Jack moved like the ghost his unit had named him, eliminating perimeter guards silently with his knife. Years of special operations training had taught him to strike fast and hard, giving enemies no time to organize a defense. The first guard never knew what hit him. The second managed a muffled cry before Jack's blade found his throat. By the time Jack reached the main building, he'd neutralized 6 of the 8 guards without raising an alarm. Inside, he found worse than he'd imagined. 12 children, ages 8 to 14, huddled in a basement room. They'd been conditioned to fear any adult, but something in Jack's quiet demeanor convinced them he was different. "I'm here to get you out," he whispered to Ryan, who barely recognized his father. The boy had lost weight, and his eyes held a haunted quality that made Jack's heart break. Daddy. Ryan's voice was small, uncertain. Yes, son. Daddy's here. But their reunion was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Carlton had returned with reinforcements, more than Jack had anticipated. Change of plans, Jack muttered, moving to secure the room. Everyone stay down. Through the windows, Jack saw Carlton stepping out of a black SUV, followed by 6 armed men. These weren't local criminals. They moved with military precision and carried professional-grade weapons. Carlton's voice boomed through a megaphone. Ghost. I know you're in there. You killed my men, but you're trapped now. Jack smiled grimly. Carlton had done his homework, but had made a critical error. He'd assumed Jack was operating alone. Jack activated the emergency beacon Dennis had given him. Within minutes, 3 FBI agents Dennis trusted would arrive with backup. But Jack couldn't wait that long. Carlton was ordering his men to bring gasoline to burn the building. Stay hidden, Jack told the children. No matter what you hear, don't come out until the good guys arrive. Jack emerged from the building with his hands raised, but his posture remained confident. Carlton stood 50 feet away, surrounded by his men. The famous ghost, Carlton sneered. You don't look like much. Neither did the last man who threatened my family, Jack replied calmly. He's buried in Afghanistan. Carlton's expression darkened. You cost me a lot of money, soldier boy. Roberts was valuable. And Detective Fields, well, he won't be much help anymore. Your operation's finished, Carlton. The FBI has everything. Accounts, locations, names. You can kill me, but you can't stop what's coming. Carlton laughed. The FBI? Half of them work for us. The other half don't have the balls to touch us. That's when the first sniper bullet took down one of Carlton's men. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The battle erupted in chaos. Carlton's men scrambled for cover as FBI snipers, positioned by Dennis's contacts, began systematically eliminating targets. But Jack wasn't waiting for rescue. He was already moving. During the confusion, Jack dove behind Carlton's SUV and came up with weapons taken from the fallen guards. His military training took over completely. Precise shots, tactical movement, and the cold calculation of a professional killer. Carlton realized too late that he'd walked into a trap. The FBI hadn't just been building a case. They'd been planning a coordinated strike. Jack's personal mission had become the opening move in a larger operation to dismantle the entire trafficking network. You think you've won? Carlton screamed, grabbing a submachine gun. I'll kill every one of those kids before I go down. He never got the chance. Jack's shot took him center mass, spinning him around. Carlton fell to his knees, looking up at Jack with a mixture of rage and disbelief. My son, Jack said, standing over Carlton, will never be afraid of you again. Carlton tried to raise his weapon one last time. Jack's second shot ended the threat permanently. As FBI agents secured the compound and began evacuating the children, Jack found himself holding Ryan for the first time in 18 months. The boy was different, scarred by his experience, but alive. Is it over, Dad? Ryan asked. For you it is, Jack promised. You're safe now. But even as he said it, Jack knew the larger war was just beginning. The FBI raids that night had netted dozens of arrests, but Jeffrey Griffith, the man at the top of the organization, had escaped. Agent Lorna Curtis, one of the FBI agents Dennis trusted, approached Jack as medics checked Ryan. We got most of them, she said, but Griffith's in the wind. He's got resources, connections. He'll try to rebuild. Jack's expression was stone cold. Then I'll be waiting for him. Jack, you can't. Agent Curtis, Jack interrupted. I've spent my career following orders, respecting chains of command, and trusting the system. That system failed my son. From now on, I handle threats to my family my way. As they prepared to leave the compound, Jack received a call that changed everything. It was his ex-wife Celia, calling from a police station. Jack, you have to listen to me. I never wanted this to happen. Carlton, he threatened me. He said he'd kill Ryan if I didn't cooperate. I was trying to protect him. Jack's jaw tightened. Another lie from a woman who'd enabled his son's abuse. Celia, I have recordings of you recruiting victims. I have bank records showing payments. Save your excuses for the judge. Please, Jack. I made mistakes, but I never wanted Ryan hurt. You have to believe me. Jack looked at his son, sleeping fitfully in the medical transport. "No, Celia, I don't have to believe anything from you ever again." The phone call ended, but Jack knew Celia's legal troubles were just beginning. Her cooperation with the trafficking ring was well documented, and her claims of coercion wouldn't stand up in court. As the convoy headed back toward the city, Jack began planning his next move. Jeffrey Griffith was still out there, and as long as he lived, children would continue to suffer. The war wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. Chapter 7. The Hunt Begins. 2 weeks after the mountain compound raid, Jeffrey Griffith remained a ghost. Despite a federal manhunt and $1 million reward, the trafficking kingpin had vanished completely. But Jack knew something the FBI didn't. Griffith wasn't running. He was planning revenge. The first attempt on Jack's life came at a grocery store. 2 professionals with military-grade weapons, attempting to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. They'd underestimated their target. Jack killed both men and disappeared before police arrived, leaving behind only a message for Agent Curtis. "Tell Griffith he'll have to do better." Jack had moved Ryan to a secure location, a cabin owned by Dennis's security firm, protected by former Special Forces operators. The boy was receiving therapy for his trauma, but Jack knew healing would take time. What mattered was that Ryan was safe while Jack finished what Carlton had started. The break Jack needed came from an unexpected source: Arnold Shepard, a mid-level criminal who'd worked for Griffith's organization. Facing 20 years in federal prison, Shepard decided cooperation was his best option. Griffith's not just about the trafficking, Shepard revealed during a clandestine meeting. That was just one revenue stream. He runs everything: weapons smuggling, drug distribution, contract killing. And he's got protection at the highest levels. "What kind of protection?" Jack asked. "Federal judges, state senators, even someone in the governor's office. The man's been building this network for 15 years. You take him down, you bring down half the political establishment." Jack absorbed this information. It explained why Griffith had operated with impunity for so long. But it also meant that traditional law enforcement approaches would never work. "Where is he?" Jack demanded. Shepard hesitated. "There's a place in the mountains. Former military installation, off the books. Griffith bought it through shell companies and turned it into his command center." "But Jack, this isn't like Carlton's operation. Griffith's got 40 men up there, all ex-military or law enforcement. It's a fortress." Jack smiled grimly. "Good. I always preferred hard targets." But as he planned his assault on Griffith's compound, Jack received disturbing news from Agent Curtis. 3 more children had disappeared from foster care, and the FBI believed Griffith was rebuilding his trafficking operation despite the heat. "He's accelerating his timeline," Curtis explained during a secure phone call. "We think he's planning to disappear permanently, but not before eliminating witnesses and settling scores." Jack knew he was running out of time. Every day Griffith remained free meant more children would suffer. It was time to end this permanently. Chapter 8. Into the Lion's Den. Griffith's compound was everything Shepard had described. A former Cold War-era installation built into a mountainside with multiple defensive positions and overlapping fields of fire. Jack spent 3 days conducting reconnaissance, identifying patrol patterns and weak points. But he wasn't planning a direct assault. That would be suicide, even for someone with his skills. Instead, Jack was going to use Griffith's paranoia against him. Working with Dennis and Agent Curtis, Jack orchestrated a series of false flag operations designed to make Griffith believe his own security team was compromised. Fake intelligence leaks, staged betrayals, and carefully planted evidence convinced Griffith that someone in his inner circle was working with the FBI. The psychological warfare worked perfectly. Griffith's paranoia reached a breaking point, and he began eliminating his own men. By the time Jack made his move, Griffith's 40-man army had been reduced to 12 loyal followers. Jack's assault began at dawn, using tactics learned in counterterrorism operations. Smoke grenades, flashbangs, and precision strikes designed to create maximum confusion. But his real weapon was fear. The same fear Griffith had used to control victims for years. Moving through the compound like a specter, Jack eliminated targets silently. leaving behind calling cards that referenced the children Griffith had trafficked. The psychological impact was devastating. Griffith's remaining men began to panic, making mistakes that cost them their lives. By noon, Jack had neutralized all but Griffith himself, who had barricaded himself in the compound's central bunker with the last of his bodyguards. "Griffith!" Jack's voice echoed through the facility. "You've got nowhere to run. Your operation is finished, your men are dead, and the FBI has everything. Come out and face justice." Griffith's response came through the bunker's intercom system. "Justice? You want to talk about justice, soldier boy? I gave those children purpose. I gave them value in a world that would have thrown them away." Jack felt his anger building, but kept his voice controlled. "You destroyed their lives for profit. I created order from chaos. The system failed those children long before I found them. At least with me, they served a purpose." Jack had heard enough. Using explosives taken from Griffith's own armory, he began systematically breaching the bunker's defenses. Each blast brought him closer to the man who had orchestrated his son's suffering. The final confrontation took place in Griffith's personal office, a room filled with monitors showing his various criminal enterprises. Griffith stood behind his desk, a gun in each hand, flanked by his last two bodyguards. "You can't kill an idea, Ghost," Griffith said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. "I built something bigger than myself. Take me down, and someone else will take my place." "Maybe," Jack replied, his rifle aimed at Griffith's chest. "But they'll know what happens to people who hurt children." The gunfight was brief but intense. Jack's superior training and tactics prevailed, but not before Griffith managed to activate a dead man's switch, a system designed to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. As alarms blared and the compound began its self-destruct sequence, Jack grabbed the hard drives containing Griffith's client lists and financial records. The information would be crucial for dismantling what remained of the trafficking network. But his escape was complicated by an unexpected discovery. Griffith had been holding 6 children in a hidden section of the bunker, intending to use them as human shields if necessary. Jack had 2 minutes to get everyone out before the compound's destruction. It would be the longest 2 minutes of his life. Chapter 9. Coming Home. The explosion that destroyed Griffith's compound could be seen for miles. Jack and the 6 rescued children barely made it to safety, emerging from an emergency tunnel as the mountainside erupted in flames behind them. FBI agents and paramedics were waiting, alerted by the emergency beacon Jack had activated. As the children were taken to safety, Agent Curtis approached Jack with news that would change everything. "The hard drives you recovered contained enough evidence to bring down the entire network," she said. 3 federal judges, 2 state senators, and dozens of law enforcement officials. "The arrest started an hour ago." Jack nodded, but his thoughts were on the children, both those he'd rescued and his own son, who was waiting for him at the safe house. The war was over, but the healing was just beginning. The drive to the cabin took 2 hours, giving Jack time to process what had happened. In the span of 3 weeks, he'd gone from soldier to vigilante to hero. The media was calling him the Angel of Vengeance, though Jack preferred his military call sign, Ghost. Ryan was waiting on the cabin's porch when Jack arrived, looking healthier than he had in months. The therapy was working, and the boy's natural resilience was asserting itself. "Dad!" Ryan ran to embrace his father, and Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "It's over, son," Jack said, holding Ryan tight. "Really over this time." As they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset over the mountains, Ryan asked the question Jack had been dreading. "What happens now? Do we go back to how things were before?" Jack considered his answer carefully. The Army had offered him early retirement with full honors, understanding that he'd need time to help his son heal. Dennis had offered him a partnership in the security firm, work that would let him protect other families while staying close to Ryan. But more than career considerations, Jack knew that both he and Ryan were different people now. They'd survived something that would have broken many families, and that shared strength would define their future relationship. "No, son, we don't go back. We go forward. Together." Ryan smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Jack had seen from his son since returning from deployment. "I like that, Dad." 6 months later, Jack stood in a federal courthouse as the last of Griffith's co-conspirators received their sentences. The trafficking network had been completely dismantled, with over 200 children rescued and reunited with families or placed in safe homes. Celia had received 15 years for her role in the organization, a sentence that reflected both her cooperation with authorities and the severity of her crimes. She would likely never see Ryan again, a condition Jack was determined to maintain. Agent Curtis approached Jack as they left the courthouse. "So what's next for the famous ghost?" Jack smiled, watching Ryan play with other children outside the courthouse. Victims who had become survivors, now living normal lives thanks to the operation that had brought down the network. "I'm thinking about starting a foundation," Jack said. "Something to help kids like these transition back to normal life. And maybe train parents to recognize the signs of trafficking and abuse. Using your newfound celebrity status for good." Something like that. Jack's expression grew serious. "There are more networks out there, Curtis. More children who need protection. The FBI can only do so much through official channels." Curtis understood the implication. And if someone needed to operate outside those channels, then they'd know where to find me. As Jack and Ryan walked toward their new life together, Jack reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He'd started as a soldier following orders, become a father seeking vengeance, and emerged as a protector of the innocent. The war in Afghanistan was over for him, but a new mission had begun. In a world where evil often went unpunished and children suffered in silence, Jack Knapp would be their guardian angel, a ghost in the darkness, ensuring that monsters who preyed on the innocent would face a reckoning. Ryan looked up at his father as they reached their car. "Dad, are you really done fighting?" Jack ruffled his son's hair, thinking of the secure phone in his pocket that had already received 3 calls from desperate parents whose children had disappeared. "I'm done fighting other people's wars, son. But protecting families like ours? That's not fighting. That's what fathers do." As they drove home together, Jack knew that his most important mission wasn't over. It had just begun. He was no longer just a soldier or a father. He was something new, a man who had learned that sometimes justice required stepping outside the law to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And in a world where predators hid behind wealth and power, that was exactly what children needed. A ghost who would never stop hunting monsters. Epilogue. 5 years later. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the Knapp Foundation headquarters, casting long shadows across the converted warehouse that had become the most effective anti-trafficking organization in the western United States. Jack Knapp stood at his office window, watching as a group of survivors worked in the foundation's garden. Young adults who had once been victims but now served as counselors and advocates for other rescued children. Among them was Marcus, now 21, who had been 12 when Jack's team rescued him from a trafficking ring in Phoenix 2 years ago. The boy who had once cowered in fear now stood tall, leading a therapy session for newly rescued children. His transformation exemplified everything the foundation represented: proof that healing was possible, that survivors could become warriors in their own right. "Dad, the team's ready for briefing," came a voice from behind him. Jack turned to see Ryan, now 15, standing in the doorway. The boy had grown tall and strong, his shoulders broad like his father's, but his eyes still held traces of the trauma they'd shared 5 years ago. Those traces weren't scars anymore. They were reminders of strength, of survival, of the bond between father and son that had been forged in fire and emerged unbreakable. "How's your algebra test preparation going?" Jack asked, ruffling his son's hair as they walked toward the briefing room. "Finished it this morning. Got a 98. Ryan's grin was proud, but not boastful. "Ms. Martinez says I'm ready for advanced calculus next semester." Jack felt the familiar surge of pride, mixed with protective concern. Ryan had not only recovered from his ordeal, but had thrived, channeling his experience into academic excellence and a desire to help others. The boy was already talking about studying criminal justice in college, following in his father's footsteps, but in his own way. The briefing room buzzed with quiet intensity as Jack's team assembled. Agent Lorna Curtis, now retired from the FBI and serving as the Foundation's law enforcement liaison, spread photographs across the table. Dennis Doyle checked his tablet, coordinating with the 12 field teams the Foundation now operated across 7 states. "What do we have?" Jack asked, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Missing children case out of Seattle," Curtis began. 3 kids vanished from different foster homes over the past month. Local PD thinks they're runaways, but the pattern matches what we've seen before. Jack studied the photographs. 2 girls, ages 11 and 13, and a boy who couldn't have been more than 9. Their faces held the vulnerability that predators sought, the signs of children who had already been damaged by the system meant to protect them. "What's different about this one?" Dennis asked. Curtis had learned to read patterns that law enforcement often missed, her time with the Foundation having honed instincts that her FBI training had only begun to develop. "The foster parents," Curtis replied, pulling up financial records. All 3 families received substantial payments from a shell corporation 2 weeks before the children disappeared. And get this, the corporation traces back to a holding company owned by someone calling himself the Shepherd. Jack's jaw tightened. They'd been tracking references to this mysterious figure for 6 months, always one step behind, always finding his operations after they'd moved on. The Shepherd seemed to be building a new network, learning from Jeffrey Griffith's mistakes. "He's not making the same errors Griffith made," Jack observed. "Smaller operations, more mobile, better compartmentalization. And he's specifically targeting Foundation survivors," Curtis added grimly. 2 of the missing children were kids we'd previously rescued. "He's hunting our success stories." The room fell silent. This was personal in a way that went beyond their usual cases. Someone was deliberately targeting the Foundation's work, trying to reclaim children they'd fought to save. Ryan, who had been quietly observing from the corner where Jack allowed him to watch briefings, spoke up. "Dad, what if that's the point? What if he wants you to come after him?" Jack looked at his son with surprise and pride. At 15, Ryan had developed the kind of tactical thinking that took most adults years to acquire. "Explain your reasoning." "Think about it," Ryan continued, his voice gaining confidence. "He's not just taking random kids. He's taking your kids, ones the Foundation saved. He knows you'll come after him personally. Maybe he's trying to draw you out." Dennis nodded slowly. "The kid's right. This feels like bait. Then we'll be ready for the trap," Jack said simply. "But first, we get those children back." The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in the evolution of the Knapp Foundation's methods. Unlike the lone wolf operations Jack had conducted 5 years ago, this was a coordinated effort involving law enforcement, private investigators, tech specialists, and survivor advocates working in perfect synchronization. The investigation led them through a maze of shell companies and false identities, but gradually a picture emerged. The Shepherd wasn't just rebuilding the trafficking network, he was improving it. Instead of maintaining large, vulnerable compounds like Griffith had, he operated through a network of seemingly normal families who housed children temporarily before moving them along. "It's brilliant in its simplicity," Curtis admitted during one late-night strategy session. "No central location to raid, no permanent infrastructure to target. Just a constantly moving network of temporary placements." "Which means we need to think like him," Jack replied. "He's counting on us, trying to locate his base of operations. But what if there isn't one?" The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Christina Keenan, a survivor who had been working with the Foundation for 3 years. She'd noticed patterns in online communications that the technical team had missed, subtle coded language that reminded her of methods her own traffickers had used. "Look at the timing," she explained, pointing to a series of seemingly innocent social media posts. Every 48 hours, someone posts about visiting family or checking on the garden. It's a progress report system. Within hours, the Foundation's tech team had cracked the communication network. The missing children were being moved through a circuit of safe houses, but the pattern was predictable once you knew how to read it. "We can intercept them," Dennis reported. "Tomorrow night, they'll be at a house in Tacoma." "But Jack, this feels like a trap," Jack finished. "I know. Ryan called it 2 weeks ago. The operation that followed showcased how much both Jack and his methods had evolved. Instead of a direct assault, the Foundation coordinated with local law enforcement to create multiple simultaneous pressure points. While SWAT teams surrounded the Tacoma house, Foundation operatives hit 2 other locations where intelligence suggested backup children might be held. The plan worked perfectly, almost too perfectly. They rescued the 3 missing children and 6 others, but the shepherd himself remained elusive. However, among the evidence recovered was something that made Jack's blood run cold: detailed surveillance files on Ryan, including his school schedule, therapy appointments, and daily routines. That night, as Jack sat with Ryan in the secure apartment they'd maintained as a backup residence since the Griffith case, his son asked the question Jack had been dreading. "He's coming for me, isn't he?" Jack considered lying, protecting his son from the truth. But their relationship had been built on honesty forged in crisis, and he wouldn't diminish that now. "Yes," Jack said simply. "But son, you're not the same scared boy you were 5 years ago. And I'm not the same man either. We're ready for whatever comes." Ryan nodded, his jaw set in a way that reminded Jack of himself at that age. "What do? We do what we've always done," Jack replied. "We protect our family, and we make sure the monsters learn what happens when they threaten what matters to us." The confrontation with the shepherd came 6 months later, not through Jack hunting him down, but through the man making good on his threat against Ryan. He'd infiltrated Ryan's school as a substitute teacher, spending weeks studying his target before making his move. But the shepherd had underestimated both the security measures Jack had put in place and Ryan's own capabilities. When a man attempted to abduct Ryan during a staged emergency drill, he found himself facing not a traumatized victim, but a young man who had learned from the best. Ryan's distress signal reached Jack within 30 seconds. The tracking devices both carried led the Foundation's rapid response team directly to the shepherd's location. By the time Jack arrived, Ryan had managed to incapacitate his would-be kidnapper using techniques his father had taught him. "I remembered what you said," Ryan told Jack as they watched the shepherd being loaded into an FBI vehicle. "Monsters count on people being afraid. Once you stop being afraid, you start winning." The capture of the shepherd effectively ended the last major threat to the Foundation's work. His network, more extensive than anyone had realized, crumbled within weeks as his communication systems were compromised and his associates arrested. But perhaps more importantly, the incident marked a turning point in Ryan's own journey. He'd faced his demons and emerged victorious, not as a victim, but as a survivor who had reclaimed his power. 2 years later, as Jack watched Ryan graduate as valedictorian of his high school class, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The boy who had once whispered in terror over a satellite phone was now a confident young man planning to study criminal justice at Stanford, with the goal of joining the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit. "Proud of you, son," Jack said after the ceremony, embracing Ryan in front of family and friends who had become their chosen tribe, survivors, advocates, and warriors in the fight against those who preyed on children. "Thanks, Dad, for everything, for coming home when I needed you, for never giving up, for showing me that survivors can become protectors." Jack looked around at the celebration surrounding them. Dennis was there with his own family, Curtis with her adopted daughter, one of the children they'd rescued 3 years ago, and dozens of Foundation staff and survivors who had become their extended family. The Knapp Foundation had grown from a father's quest for vengeance into a nationwide network that had rescued over 800 children and helped prosecute more than 200 traffickers. But more than the numbers, it represented something deeper. Proof that trauma could be transformed into purpose, that victims could become victors, and that one person's refusal to accept injustice could change the world. "So what's next?" Ryan asked as they watched the sunset from the Foundation's memorial garden, where plaques honored children who hadn't survived long enough to be saved. Jack smiled, thinking of the 3 new cases on his desk, the congressional testimony he'd be giving next week about trafficking legislation, and the expansion plans that would take the Foundation's work international. "Same thing we've always done," he said. "We keep fighting. We keep saving kids. And we make sure that every monster who thinks they can hurt children learns that somewhere in the darkness, the ghost is watching." Ryan nodded, his own expression growing serious. "And soon, They'll learn that the ghost isn't hunting alone anymore. Father and son stood together in comfortable silence, two survivors who had found their purpose in protecting others. Behind them, the foundation building hummed with activity as night shift operators monitored communications and field teams prepared for operations across the country. The war against those who trafficked in human misery would never truly end. But as long as people like Jack and Ryan Knapp stood guard, the monsters would know that their victims had protectors, guardians who would never stop, never give up, and never let evil triumph over innocence. In the distance, Jack's secure phone buzzed with another case, another child in need of rescue. He looked at Ryan, who nodded with the same determination that had once driven Jack to cross an ocean to save his son. Together, they walked back toward the building, ready to answer the call. The ghost was no longer hunting alone. He had raised a new generation of protectors, and their vigil would continue for as long as children needed defending. The legacy of that desperate phone call 5 years ago lived on, transformed from Father's worst nightmare into the foundation of an unbreakable promise. No child would suffer alone, no predator would escape justice, and no family would face the darkness without guardians willing to stand between them and the monsters. The real victory wasn't just in the battles won, but in the army of survivors who now stood ready to protect the next generation. And at their head stood Jack and Ryan Knapp, father and son, ghost and guardian, proof that love could conquer even the darkest evil.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.